Ishi Abel here with the Horse Human Connection Matrix. Today's podcast is about tying several of the more recent podcasts together and some reflections I have and metaphors that, I couldn't have set it up any better, the guests that I've had and the things that they've talked about, and how there's been this common thread weaving through all of the talk about horses and the matrix and dominance and how we can change things. So way back interviewing Rupert Isaacson, he said something at the end of the podcast when I asked him if he was part of the quiet revolution in the horse world. And what he said was something to the effect of that it's bigger than that he could definitely buy into a shifting in the way humans are, that he sees happening all over, that what I'm doing with the horses and the dominance seems to be a metaphor for. And when I go back to Ginny Patel Thompson's early interviews, she's so much about being present, listening to your horse, developing ways to enter into their culture and have an open mind. And that really is the beginning of all of it, admitting that we have a problem in our culture. And that's the first step to trying to be the change, to enact the change. A lot of the conversations with Luke and Braver Angels are also reflecting that place where we are with this incredible political divide that isn't serving anyone. It's serving to dismantle our country, which personally I think is a good thing, but maybe not in the sense that a lot of people that really support Trump would say. I see a much bigger dismantling, a much larger, I love to think about Kali, the Hindu goddess of destruction, and how everything has to come apart before it can be rebuilt. And I think back 20, 25 years, even 30 years when my kids were little, seeing all of the problems with the education system, the medical system, a lot of things that were broken in this country, the corrupt politicalness, the way bills are written, the way lobbyists are driven by big business. All of these things have been problems for most of my lifetime. And I hold that up against consciousness raising. And when we slow down enough, when we meditate, when we watch our thoughts, when we look closely, and part of this is my autistic brain digging deep and thinking long and hard about where the problems stem from and what out-of-the-box solutions there could be. So the interview with Luke and Braver Angels that really outlines very simple things like whatever's happening politically, we are still Americans. And before that, we are all part of humanity, and how we want to treat each other, how we want to listen to each other, how we want to focus on what's the same, what's common. And I think he made some really good points about when we break down, whether you're red or blue, and we break down what we want. We all want a strong economy, or we want access to the goods and services that we need. We all want to support our families and have close, loving relationships. We want to feel safe. We want to feel heard. We want to feel like we have a structure in place that's bigger than us that we can rely on. I don't think anybody doesn't want those things. And yet, in the interview with Rupert, he outlines the culture in South African Bushmen that doesn't have a hierarchy, that doesn't have leaders, that relies on the shaman to go into the unseen world to fix problems energetically between people when things get too sticky. And I look at our culture and how we have a New Age movement, or back in the 60s and 70s, we had a lot of hippies or communes or different ideas that were counterculture, counter to the culture of having any kind of government. And how does this relate to horse training? Well, let's think about that for just a minute. When we govern our horses with a government like natural horsemanship or any overlay of complete dominance, that's kind of what we're doing. There's a lot of stuff flying around on Facebook right now about how we've been tricked, how we've been dominated, how we've been lied to, and how all of this needs to be dismantled. And I'm not going to tell you it's going to start with natural horsemanship. But if you think about it, there is a metaphor there. There's a very good metaphor there. When I looked to my interview with Sarah, my dear friend Sarah's Weeping Pearl episode, and how she decided to not call her cancer cancer, how she decided to not ever say she was fighting cancer, because she's not. She's living with it. Our words, our thoughts become our words become our deeds and actions, and our deeds and actions dictate our reality and the lens that we look through. So we best be careful. We best stop and catch our thoughts. And if they're garbage and negative, drag them to the trash, throw them away, replace them with something more spiritual or positive. I so admire Sarah for all of the commentary and how she has mindfully navigated her dying. And it doesn't escape me that our culture is dying in a lot of ways and needs to. Again, with the Kali, right? The destruction, the death. And out of that death comes rebirth. Craig Smith had quite the commentary on our culture, likening it to an addict, talking about the narcissistic qualities of our culture and how we're addicted to power and materialism, and how these things spring naturally out of colonialism and capitalism. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong about any of it. And I see how it fits, how this growing awareness, and I keep hearing these conversations, and Carissa quoted having one recently with friends about the colonialism. And I think that it's the conversation that Luke started about the polarity that people feel that has them looking for another answer, has them looking at things through a different lens, having them go back to like, where did this start? How did we get in so much trouble? There are all these things in our culture that people want to change. There are things about horse training that I want to change. And they're very similar. Pulling it together, interviewing Carissa after interviewing Craig, and what Kai had to say about our environment is so important. And there was such a great segue from a lot of Craig's talk about you can't understand an organism unless you understand its environment. It's so true. Like, I can apply that to so many things, right? I can apply it to myself and people I meet. I can apply it to how I interact with people in different environments, how other people interact in different environments, and where we come from as a base, what our childhood experiences are, how all of those conversations segued into like the narcissist view, the colonialism, and then mental health. As Carissa took us back through the history of mental health and the history of horse training and gave us context at those intersections, it really, oh my gosh, it gives so much context to my entire podcast, right? And I'm also so grateful, I wanted to interview her first when I first began the podcast, and she was so busy and had to really kind of think and evolve because she's such a great thinker, and I'm just so spontaneous. But I'm so grateful that it worked out, that her interview came when it did, after Ginny, after Rupert, after Luke, after Sarah, and after Craig, and after Kai, because all of those conversations are part of what she was talking about. And there's been such an interactive thread pulling through all of these interviews that I am absolutely amazed. It definitely feels like a God thing. And then we land with Amanda, who echoes a lot of Carissa's belief and offers new insights about moving forward that circle so nicely back to Rupert and Ginny's early conversations also about our need to slow down and listen, our need to challenge our beliefs, our need to challenge if our culture is appropriate in so many ways. And we're doing that with the quiet revolution in the horse world. We're doing that by challenging absolute dominance. We're doing that by wanting to offer horses more of a choice. We're doing that by coming into their culture and developing deep foundational relationships with them and listening to their wisdom. One of my very favorite books of all time is Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. I read it years ago, but it was a life-changing book. And it's a really weird kind of story about a talking ape in a hotel room. And the friend that recommended it kept saying to me, stay with it. Once you get a third of the way through, you'll want to finish it. It'll go quick, but it's kind of weird in the beginning. And she was right. But this book changed my life. And it helped that I also read Mutant Messages from Down Under for the second time as I was reading Ishmael. And what these two books told me is that the activities and the structure of our primitive cultures are going to be the saving grace of humanity. Back before Mesopotamia, back before gardening, farming, civilization as we know it, nomadic tribes didn't take from the earth. In Ishmael, he calls them takers and leavers. And the leaver culture is the one that we're going to need to look to not only protect the earth, but to protect our humanity. And Mutant Messages from Down Under is also a crazy story. The first time, it's a fictional book, but it's not. The first time I read it, I thought it was fiction. The second time I read it with Ishmael, I realized it was real to the bone. That you absolutely can smell water in the desert. That you can rely on spiritual guides for survival. That when you become more acquainted with and one with your environment, the natural environment of the earth, you're in a different place. And I discovered that last spring, and I talk about being in right relationship, that episode, and eating the wild greens and then being able to find plants more easily. I absolutely know that Mutant Messages is not a fictional book. And the awareness that comes from opening up our minds that America isn't great, that colonialism and capitalism, while they're functioning historical things that offered a lot as an experiment, are not the way we're meant to live. Now, horses are here to remind us of what we knew when we first began living with them, way, way, way back when. That's where I am. That's what I think. The quiet revolution in the horse world isn't just about horses. It's about humanity surviving.